Salvete omnes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Caesar's Gallic Wars. Last time we left off, the Gauls in Book 5 had attacked Cicero's camp, had offered a truce, but really just kind of a chance to ambush them. Or at least in the hopes of ambushing them, I should say. But Cicero is a little bit smarter than Titurius, and so the Gauls have been rebuffed, I guess, from this request, and so they decided to just do a full-out frontal assault. In 42, we saw them creating all these different siege equipment, towers, these hooks that would be used to kind of pull the wall out, shells or sheds, tortoises literally, but kind of defensive structures that people could hide under as they approach the walls to use these hooks and whatnot. These kind of like little tanks. So that is where we left off. So we'll pick up in section 43. Septimo appugnationes die maximo quarta vento ferventes fusili ex argilla glandes fundis et fervofacta iacula in casas, quae more Gallico stramentis erant tectae iacera coiperunt. So, start off. Ablative of time when. On the 7th day of the fight. Then we get an ablative absolute. Caesar loves his ablative clauses. With a very great wind having arisen, deponent participle. We get Fuentes here, and it's tempting to make this the nominative. It definitely could be a nominative here, but it is actually going to be accusative as the object of Iacera Coiperun. One of the reasons I like to read the sentences first in Latin is I can start to piece together where things go. If I just go straight ahead and translate without looking at the whole sentence, I might miss clues that can help me out later. So I think we want this to be... They began to throw... And we get this relatively long clause here. They are Fuentes glandes, and it's kind of this oniony clause. You could say it's these different layers. They threw Fuentes glandes ex fusili argilla. So, excuse me. Fuentes glandes, your accusative, these are burning, fervent, in the most literal sense of literally being hot. These burning bullets for glandes. It's the things shot from slings, which is kind of repeated here with fundis. So they began to throw these kind of burning bullets, and these bullets are made from fusili ex argilla. These are bullets from molten clay. So fusili here, referring to the clay. It has been, it's liquefied, it's molten, it's very hot. Obviously not so hot that it's not maintaining its shape, but definitely superheated. And argilla is just clay. So they began to throw these burning bullets from molten clay from slings. So there's your ablative of means, explaining where these bullets are coming from. And they also began to throw fervofacta iacula, kind of heated things that have been made ferve. So here's ferve again. These heated javelins or missiles or spears or something like that. They began to throw these burning spears onto the casas, onto the houses. You could translate it as house or hut. It's referring to the buildings inside the camp. So, however you want to translate that, you could perhaps just go with the very general, onto the buildings. Which erant tectae, which were covered I want this to be. I think I want this to be a perfect passive verb. The houses, which were covered by straw, straw or thatch, in the Gallic custom, More Gallico. So the Gauls use thatched roofs for their dwellings. The Romans here are also using this method, perhaps because that is the resource that's more reliable. Or more readily available, I should say. Perhaps not more reliable, because also more likely to catch fire. Spoilers, as we'll see. Haec celeriter ignem comprehenderunt, et venti magnitudine in omnem locum castrorum distulerunt. So, these things, we have to go to our last feminine plural to figure out what these things are. We look through, we find out that it is the casas, the huts, or the buildings. So these buildings seized the fire, or caught fire, you could perhaps say, quickly. And, and they are still the subject of distulero. And they kind of spread into every location of the camp, into every place of the camp. When T here, I want to be a genitive. I'm going with magnitudine. The buildings spread the fire by the magnitude of the wind into every location of the camp. I think that is what makes more sense. These buildings are not only catching fire, they are spreading the fire. I don't think it'd be wrong to make Wenti the subject. These buildings caught fire, and the winds, due to their magnitude, spread the understood fire into every location of the camp. I don't think it's wrong to make winds the subject. I don't know. For whatever reason, I feel hesitant to do that. Again, I don't think it's wrong. I think you could flip a coin when it comes down to it to see how do you want that to be a genitive to governing magnitude, the magnitude of the wind, or do you want that to be the subject that is scattering the fire? The buildings catch the fire and the wind spreads it. That works just as well. Honestly, the more I talk about it, the more I can convince myself of either one. So, truly, I think your choice. All right. Hostes maximo clamore, sicuti parta iam aqua explorata victoria, turres testitudinesque agera et scalis volum ascendera coiperunt. The enemy, maximo clamore, with a great shout, ablative of perhaps accompaniment, without cum, is probably how you take it here. They're doing all this with a great shout. A great shout is happening as this is going on. So the enemy with a great shout, then we get this long I guess an ablative absolute. I don't think it's an ablative absolute. I think you just treat it as a sentence. Supply est in here, just as kind of like, or as if sic uti. As if victory had now been kind of produced and uncovered, is kind of the idea here. Parta and explorata. It's an odd way of like. I feel like these are odd words for me. I would not. I definitely wouldn't use both. I might use just one. I might use like parta or something. Maybe not parta and explorata. But the idea is the enemies believe that they have victory now. Because, again, they see fire throughout the whole camp, right? And so, with a great shout, as if victory had been kind of produced and, and seen, the enemy began to drive, to lead, to even just push the towers and the tortoises, the towers and the shells, and they began to climb the ramparts or the wall with ladders. So So the enemy's now like prepared to make a full attack on the camp. Like up till now, it's kind of like, all right, we'll see if we can get the camp caught on fire, and then if we're successful there, we will move on to the full-on assault. All right, I'm looking at the Mueller text, and he puts Parta Explorata Victoria as an ablative absolute. So, which works. So the enemy, with like, it's kind of like as if with victory obtained and seen, they begin to do this. I am not smart enough to argue against Mueller. I don't see why it couldn't be, but that doesn't mean that has to be. So, if you are given long marks, I would make use of those long marks. So if you were to take the AP test, and they provide long marks for you, if you see a long mark over the A, if this passage were on there and you see Parta Explorata Victoria, treat that as an ablative absolute. If you aren't given long marks, or you are given long marks but they don't put a long mark over that, then don't treat it as an ablative absolute. I think that's, use the text that you are given. Use whatever clues the text provides, if you can. Regardless, the enemy believes that they have won, or that victory is within their grasp. And so, again, they start pushing these towers and tortoises up to the camp. All right, the Romans have to respond, though. So let's see their response. At tanta militum virtus, atque ea praesenti animi fuit, ut comundiqua flamma torrerentur, maxima quod telorum magnitudine premerentur, suaque omnia impedimenta atque omnes fortunas confligare intellegerent, non modo demigrandi causa de volo decederet nemo, sed paene ne respiceret quidem quisquam, auctum omnes acerrime fortissime pugnarent. Nice long sentence, but it's a very exciting sentence. Caesar definitely building up his men here, much better than perhaps Titurius's men. So, but so great. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Fuit all the way down here. So great was Fuit. So great was the courage of the soldiers, and I think you still want Tanta. So great was literally the presence of mind. Here, the presence of their spirit. The Romans have their wits about them, I think, is really kind of the idea here, right? They're not in a panic. They're not freaking out. They're calm and collected. They may not be cool because, well, flamma torrerentur. Ha 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 ha. Cross-lingual puns. All right. So great was the courage of the soldiers and their presence of mind. That we get a result clause here, bouncing off of Tanta. And actually, you get two subjunctive clauses. You get an ut clause, you get a result clause describing what the result of their so great courage was, but also you get a cum clause here. And I think the cum clause here is probably going to be, again, with cum, I've said this before, I'll say it again. You're never wrong if you translate cum as when it's used with a subjunctive. But sometimes it is better to use a word like since or although. And I do think although makes more sense here. So great was the presence of mind that. Although, and the soldiers are still separate, although they were roasted, torrerentur, they were roasted by flames, or by flame, on all sides. Ablative here. That should really be an ablative. And although they were pressed, they're being pressed, or pressured, perhaps, by a very great multitude of weapons, particularly of projectiles. So, these molten clay are being flung at them. These burning javelins are being thrown at them. There's probably arrows involved, and just general, just kind of mayhem from the Gauls. So although they are toasted by the flame, and although they are pressured by the great multitude of weapons, and although they understand that sua omnia impedimenta, that although all of their impediments, all of their baggage, and all of their fortunes, they understand that all of those things are burning up. So that's the cum clause, right? So the nice long cum clause. 3 things that are happening here, right? They're being roasted, they are being pressured, and they are understanding that all of their stuff is going up in flames. This is an example of a tricolon crescens. Pretty close. Yeah, I'd say tricolon crescens. So you get 3 groups. It's a tricolon, so 3 groups, 3 sections. Each one a little bit bigger than the last. So undique flammator rentor, 3 words. The next one, 4 words, more syllables as well. And then the final one, much longer than the other 2. And usually, or oftentimes, tends to be about the equivalent of the previous 2. It's almost, I think, a perfect tricolon crescens will be kind of a... What's the... it'll be kind of a Fibonacci sequence, where the amount of syllables in part 1 and the amount of syllables in part 2 will add up to be the amount of syllables in part 3. You don't have to do it that way. It doesn't have to be that, but oftentimes you'll see that it's something very close to that. Kind of, a little bit of 1, a little bit more of 2, and then a whole lot of 3. Tends to be the pattern. All right, so what is the result then? So although all these things are happening, their courage was so great that decaderant. So we can go down to finally get this subjunctive. We get a couple of things that they do or don't do. So, first one, not only non-moto, not only does no one, and notice, focus on the placement of Nemo here. He leaves it to the very end, which is a very kind of emphatic thing, because if you assume that the verb is the end of the clause, and it usually is in Latin, look at how this sentence it's playing out in your mind as you translate it in word order, right? Not only for the sake of retreating from the wall, they depart, or they recede, they move back. You're like, wait, I thought their courage was great. What do you mean they're receding from the wall for the sake of retreat? They're not only doing that, what else are they doing? No one. Oh, double negative there. Not only does no one depart from the wall or the rampart for the sake of, I'll say, retreating. So not only do they not move away, but each person, quisquam, kind of any one person, almost doesn't even look back. So they're not even so not only are they not stepping back to avoid the attack, they're not even looking away. They are solely focused on the goal in front of them. So non-moto with the said, so not only does nobody depart, but in fact, kind of each person, and the paine is important because when it comes to Latin prose, it's important to be literal with your translation and to avoid hyperbole. In poetry, go crazy, right? Have the seas be swallowed up by the storm and have, whatever crazy things you want. In prose, you should be concrete and literal and truthful, perhaps. So, somebody probably looked back. They looked back for any number of reasons, right? Somebody could have looked back just, to hear what the person behind him shouted for, or may have looked back to get more arrows, whatever the case may be. So, almost they didn't look back, but they probably did. Also want to emphasize ne quidem. Ne quidem means not even, and it always emphasizes the word in between it. So, basically, almost no one even looks back. So really emphasizing the respicaret, not necessarily in contrast, but perhaps in conjunction with decedere. So nobody departs. They don't even look back. Right, so we're going one step further. So they're doing three things, right? They're not retreating. They're barely looking back. And at that time, everyone was fighting very fiercely and very bravely. Again, that's all off of the result clause, right? So ut takes care of decederet, respicaret, and pugnarent. And cum takes care of tolerentur, premarentur, and intellegerent. So, a nice subjunctive clause within another subjunctive clause. What I find to be helpful, if you're translating, especially a long sentence like this, bracketing off things, similar to like a math equation, right? The more brackets and parentheses you have, the kind of easier it can be to kind of focus on what steps you should take. So I would be doing something like that here. It's like I get ut, oh, and cum. So all right, let me focus on my cum clause. I'll bracket that off or underline it, or maybe I highlight with one color, and then I'd put other brackets around ut through pugnarent, and then maybe underline or highlight this in another color to show this is kind of like the main clause. So Latin likes its packages. So I encourage that a lot when you're reading. Look for your packages. Look for a kind of an open parentheses, closed parentheses sort of structure. All right. Let's continue. Hic dies nostris langre gavissimus fuit, sed tamen hunc habuit eventum, ut eo die maximus numerus ostium vulnerator, atque interficaretur, ut se sub ipso volo constipaverant, recessum qua primis ultimi non dabant. So, this day, hic dies, this day that I'm describing, was by far the most serious, the most severe for our men. Nostris dative. Longe here, it's an adverb describing this or modifying this adjective. So it was the most serious, longly or by far. By a long measure, this was the most serious. It's kind of like, you get this one, and then all the others, this is the worst day, and then way far away you get days 2 and 3 and 4 in terms of severity. But, so this was the hardest day. But, however, or perhaps nevertheless, it had this literally outcome, right? A plus ventum. It had this outcome, it had this, you could say event, but I'd say outcome or result. Result. Ut. This is the result. So you get another result clause here. The other result clause we had, just in the previous sentence, is what we're more obviously taught from our textbook, where you get a word meaning like so or such, followed by ut. Here we have another result clause, but it's in apposition to literally the word result. It had this result. The result that, etc., etc. So, we're going to have some subjunctives. That, on that day, AODA, ablative of time when, the greatest number of enemies were wounded. Or the greatest number was wounded. The greatest number was wounded and interficerator, and the greatest number of enemies were killed. And then we get another ut here, but notice that ut has indicative verbs with it rather than subjunctive verbs. And that's an important distinction to remember when you see ut. Ut plus a subjunctive is usually like a result or a purpose clause or an indirect command. Ut plus the indicative just means something like as or like or maybe something like even like because. I want to translate it as because here. or since. Because it's explaining the reasoning why so many were wounded and killed. So, as they were kind of stuffing themselves, literally the word constipate is going to come from this, so they were stuffing themselves underneath the rampart itself. So, stuffed or crowded, perhaps, like they were crowded, or they had crowded themselves beneath the very wall. And the people in the back, the ultimi, the furthest ones from the wall, the people in the back were not giving recess. They were not giving retreat or kind of, they were not giving a step back for the people in the front. So the premiums and the people closest to the wall, right, they were the first ones to the wall. The people behind them, the people in the back, were not giving those people kind of any retreat or any way to move back. And so when it starts to turn against them, right, and the Romans start to repel the Gauls, they have nowhere to run. They're trapped by their own men, right, because they had crowded themselves beneath the wall and weren't giving themselves any chance to retreat. So this is why the greatest number of enemies were wounded and killed. As they had stuffed themselves and weren't giving them any chance to retreat, the result was that. So result clause, and then just I think you just say it's a temporal clause. In this case, just telling you what was going on at that time. Paulum quidem intermissa flamma, et quodam loco turi adacta et contingite volum tertia cohortis centuriones ex eo quo stavant, loco recesserunt, suosqua omnes remo verunt, nutu vocibusqua hostes, si introira velent, vocare coiperunt. Quorum progredi alsus est, nemo. Again, emphasis of nemo at the very end of the sentence, which is a nice little punctuation there. All right. So, start with ablative absolute. Paulum quidem intermissa flamma. So with the flame kind of having died down, I might translate it as intermissa. It is a perfect passive participle, so with like the flame having had space kind of put in between. Paulum, a little bit. So like, kind of like with the flame having died down, indeed, a little bit. And with the, I want to do this way, I think. With the tower kind of led up to a certain spot, and with the tower touching the wall or the rampart. So here you get along ablative absolute turi governing ad acta and contingente. So like at a certain location or with the tower drawn up to a certain location and with it touching the wall. Centuriones tertiae cohortes, the centurions of the third cohort. So just one of the different, a smaller group, a smaller section of a legion. The centurions of the third cohort. And this is a wonderful little bit. I'm just going to do it in the word order, and I'll go back and fix it if I need to. From that point where they were standing, ex eo loco, from that point in which they were standing, they receded. They stepped back, which is important because they're not demigrandi, right? They're not like retreating. They're not migrating away from it. They're simply stepping back. So I love this sentence. The centurions retreated or stepped back from that location where they were standing, and they removed all of their men. So they also kind of brought their own men back. And then, nutu vocibusqua, ablatives of means or manner. So with a nod and with words, they began to call out to the enemy if they wanted to enter. And so what the Centurions are doing here is the towers have made it to the wall, so they weren't able to like repel the towers. They may be able to repel people from climbing up the ladders and whatnot, but these towers are kind of like, I mean, they are literally towers, right? Imagine just like rolling scaffolding up to a wall. The Centurions step back, and with a nod, and I imagine kind of, it's a taunt, right? They are taunting the enemy here. They began to call, or again, they almost like taunt. They began to taunt the enemy with nod and words. So it's kind of this like, I imagine in a modern sense, kind of this like head, like, come on, right? Kind of like nodding your head back as an invitation for somebody to advance. And also with words, right? So, you know, presumably maybe they know a little bit of Gallic, or maybe the Gauls know enough Latin that they can say, come here, right? Weniaduk, come here. They began to call them, kind of like, you know, ask them, call them out, taunt them if they would like to enter. Indirect question here, so kind of like calling out. So they're asking like, do you want to come in? Do you want to come in? And so you get this kind of indirect question here, I think. They began to kind of call out to them if they wanted to enter. Of which, that is the enemy, to progress or to step forward, dared no one. And so again, Caesar leaving the no one to the very end for kind of this nice little punctuation to end the sentence. So of the enemy, they dared to progress, they dared to step forward, no one. And I love that, right? The Gauls are attacking the Roman camp. The Romans step back. It's like, okay, please, come on in to our camp. We'll fight you in here. And the Gauls are like, no, we don't want to do that. And then why attack? You cowards. French are all alike. No. Tum, ex omni parte, lapidibus conjectis de turbati, turisque sucensa est. Alright. De turbati, referring, I believe, to the enemy here. So then, and I think I want to supply a sunt here, because I think we have two separate sentences. It's a compound sentence, right? Action A and action B. And this verb can't govern what's going on here. This isn't an ablative absolute. Actually, let me double check the tense. It's entirely possible that it does say de turbatis in some texts. So let me double check another text real quick. Yeah. I think you want that to be de turbati sunt. So, the enemies were disturbed, were kind of perhaps driven back. Now we get an ablative absolute. They were driven back with rocks hurled from all sides. Ex omni parte. From every, so with rocks hurled from every side, the enemy, are driven back. So they don't want to enter the camp, and then the Romans start throwing rocks at them, and then they retreat. And the tower, nominative, the tower is set ablaze. It's lit on fire. So, yeah. I would not want to climb that ladder now or climb that tower. So that is the situation for the Gauls. They're making the attack, but they're not doing a very good job. Let's see. Anything else I need to mention? I think there was one. Oh yeah, I do want to mention up here. This is perhaps a little odd. Tourus is kind of an odd. It's almost like an archaic third declension noun. Turi is ablative. You can have an ablative singular ending with an I in the third declension. It's not super common. You'll in that case, basically, I mean, you'll usually see an E here, but don't be surprised to see an I, and Tours is one of those that you will tend to see an I. In fact, this I is actually very powerful in tourist because even in the accusative, and I'm not sure if we've seen it or not, but in the accusative, you'll often see Turim, Turrim, as opposed to em. So this is an ablative absolute because of this kind of I stem third declension. All right, I think that will do it for section 43. Action definitely picking up. I think it's very exciting. This has been a long video, but I think it's a very quick-moving passage, and the next passage is my favorite. I love this passage a whole lot. That would probably be a long video, 44. Again, I think the action moves quickly, but I will spend a lot of time talking about it and fanning over it. So that will be the next video. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below or email me, or class will start up again tomorrow. You can hit me up in class if you're one of my students. If you're not one of my students, then you'll have to comment down below. Don't forget, if you're doing, watching these videos regularly, feel free to subscribe, hit the bell so you know when a new video is posted. And with that, have a great rest of your day. I will see you in the next one. Later.